How's the lighting? Terrible as usual. I don't know if I would improve it if I put the light on that's above my head. It's really bright. And that's going to do terrible things to the lines in my face, but just... let me know. That's terrible. I had a different phone at one point that I used to, I wasn't using portrait style and just sort of landscape, and it just worked so much better than if I try to do this one landscape. When I do that, it's just all distorted and it's really weird and it's really off-putting for me. So I do it this way, and I know it's not ideal. I know people really hate this format. But anywho, I'm just mucking around for a few minutes because sometimes when I've just started talking, and I do like to get straight into things, but sometimes when I've just started talking, what happens is, it's cut off at the start. This is a case from Australia that I want to talk about that a lot of people might never have heard of. Some people might be really familiar with it, and it's a very divisive case. It's not the same. It's not a one of a kind in Australia, believe it or not. There's another lady other than Kathleen Folbigg who also had 4 children die in quick succession, I think within a 5-year period, starting after the death of Kathy's last child's death. And her name was, I think, Carol Matthey. And Carol Matthey didn't end up in prison, even though she is highly suspicious. And Kathleen Folbigg did end up in prison, and she ended up in prison for 20 years in total. There's been, hi, Mark Klein, my friend. Howdy, Doody. She ended up in prison for 20 years, for quite a number of years. There's been, endless appeals, and there's been 2 inquiries, and there's been a very long fight kind of between, the law establishment and the scientific establishment. And science for now has won out, not to the degree that some people think, although time may tell if anything further will fall down on the side of Folbigg. But she has been acquitted. She's been acquitted, allergies. She's been acquitted this year. Sorry. What I mean to say is she hasn't actually been acquitted or had anything overturned. She's been pardoned. So I'll tell you about her so you know what I'm wanting to discuss, just in case you don't know anything about her. And then I want to just see what people think. So as I said, this is a very divisive case. Some people call this woman the most hated woman in Australia. Some people think of her as Australia's worst serial killer, not because, like Catherine Knight, she killed a lot of people, but for the fact that her 4 children all died. So she's from New South Wales. She was married quite early out of high school. to a guy called Craig. Kathleen didn't know that she wasn't adopted by the family that brought her up. She had been taken into a foster home at 3 years old after her father murdered her mother. Her mother was stabbed, I think it's something like 24 times by her father. And so Kathleen was put into foster care, and she found out when she was 16 years old, quite a formative time in a young woman's life. She found out at 16 years old that she was not adopted, but a foster child. She's essentially a ward of the state. Were her foster parents simply preparing her for when she turned 18, she was spat out onto the street? That could be the case. She always felt, according to, what I've watched on online, this is from Australian Story and some other news media like 60 Minutes. But from what I understand from interviews of other foster children or friends at the time, was that Kathy had been quite coddled and held up as really the center of attention in her foster family until they actually had a biological son. Apparently she was quite the glorious little girl, and then she was nobody, persona non grata in the family. This type of early childhood experience would, hello Robert, this sort of childhood experience would, as we know from studying many crime cases, looking into the backgrounds of people that have committed crimes, people that, not only experts, I guess, but, mostly maybe lay people would consider narcissistic and maybe sociopathic, okay? And I mean, let's face it, if you are a murderer, you probably are someone with severe rage issues or just severe personality disorders that you haven't been able to overcome, or you are a psychopath, okay? And what we understand about people that have narcissistic personality disorder or perhaps just narcissistic traits is that they do have that kind of dichotomous childhood, right? Where they might be equally lauded and coddled and ignored and undervalued, and that sort of kind of weird situation in their childhood. So, given quite an easy pass and just given lots of easy praise, but not really given thought to. There's no real attempt at connection with the parent, between the parent and the child. The parent is actually very distant, very selfish, very surface, and real things that the child is going through. Hello Esbrook. I have been thinking about you so often and so much, and just worried about you. So hello. I don't know what time it will be with your Mark. It'll be earlier in the night time maybe than others, I think. I don't know where Robert's from, but I'm just guessing. Anyway, for me it's I don't know. But I'm on a day off. I've got a cup of peppermint tea here. Let me just wet the whistle. And that's delicious. All right. So, it kind of a freaky little childhood, really, that turned quite confusing and sour. And maybe Kathy felt like, well, that explains a lot. It would have probably undermined her completely, and yet also maybe helped her understand something that she could have been very well intuiting. So that's a little bit about her background. And a fellow foster sister, her name's Lee, and her husband Ted, to this day, because they knew Kathy when she was having her children, were around her, they still believe that she is absolutely guilty. And a lot of people do think that Kathy Folbigg was a sufferer of Munchausen by proxy. And I think if someone has Munchausen by proxy, that is perhaps a conduit to expression of narcissism. It's a pretty shocking allegation. And, just realized that I'm not really going to give an opinion. I'm just talking about it, okay? Hi, Kat. How are you? Good. You're good. I know you'll be good. You're all right. You've had a tough time lately. Kit gets hassled a lot on her channel with people playing all sorts of stupid tomfoolery games, and it's extremely ridiculous and childish and repulsive and unfair. So there have been scientists and of all types, so forensic criminologists and forensic psychologists. There has been an artificial intelligence program involved. There's been an immunologist from Sydney. There's been all sorts of Queen's counsellors and, 90 people in total, right? Involved over many years. Some of the Nobel laureates involved in Kathleen Folbigg's appeal. And I'll let you know a little bit about her children. So Caleb was born first. He was on the 1st of February 1989. Caleb only lived 19 days. Kathy found him limp and lifeless, and in the end it was determined that it was sudden infant death syndrome. Patrick, her second child, I think he died on the 3rd of June. I don't think that's his birthday. I think he might have died on the 3rd of June 1990. He was 4 months old, and Kathy's called 000 again to say he's not breathing. I don't think her husband was there at the time, but then has arrived or come home, and he's the one that is giving CPR. And then Caleb has been revived by the ambulance crew on the way to hospital, but he's died later. And he'd had suffered brain damage from, the initial event, and it was determined that maybe through that brain damage that he was living with for a while, he developed a seizure disorder, so like an epilepsy. And again, the ambulance is called, 911's called, and he's not breathing. Then at that time, he lived for 4 months, so it was known that he really suffered after that initial event, and he only lived 4 more months. He was 8 months old. So the first child to die was Caleb, and he was 19 days. And then, sorry, I'm tootling with my hair. I'm always cutting my own hair now. I've just cut it again. It's just bugging me. So I'll put it up properly. So Sarah is the third child born. She's also taken by ambulance, but she wasn't able to be resuscitated in the ambulance, and they weren't sure again what the issue was with Sarah. With Pat, they were sort of saying, you know, there's an airway obstruction or something, and you know, it's probably from this disease of the brain. With Sarah, she died in August 1993, and she was 10 months old, and she'd been put down for a nap or to sleep or something, and Kathy had gone in to check on her, and I found her lifeless, she says. And so Sarah was the second child to be determined to have died from sudden infant death syndrome, from SIDS. Laura was born, all of this happened within the space of 10 years. So then Laura was born, and she was described as being very, very special and very, and just totally adored. And Sarah made it to her first birthday. She's the only child that did. And, you know, there's so many things that have been quoted as being said about her by other people and by Kathy. You know, Kathy saying she was around the longest. And when she got to 12 months, we thought we were home and hosed. Kathy had taken Laura to the gym with her, so she'd gone to work out at the gym. She had her asleep in the car on the way home, she says, and put her to bed and went in to check on her very soon later, just 20 minutes later, and called 000. She's not breathing. I'm not getting a heartbeat. I've had 3 go by SIDS already. 3 weren't gone by SIDS, but, you know. Laura was determined to have had a cold-like illness for about a week beforehand, building up to her death. And then an autopsy showed that she had, myocarditis, which is inflammation of heart. And it was quite all the way through the heart. Thought of, though, to be caused by viral infection, okay? And her cause of death was determined as undetermined. Excuse me. Yes, Brooke says she's okay, doing life and all of that. Cool. So it's said that when a child dies from between 18 and 20 months, it's really too old to be called sudden infant death syndrome. She had a very thorough autopsy because of this. Now, when children are suffocated, it is well known to be possible to suffocate a child and not show anything, you know, simply by using a pillow, something like that. It's funny, you know, because people do make a lot about Kathy being alone on her own. You know, on her own means alone, doesn't it? You know, on her own with the children when these events happen, okay. With this Carol Matthey, she also had an event of being somewhere and then discovering the child passed. In the same way, I guess, that Kathy had been to the gym, says the child was asleep in the car, gets home, puts the child into bed asleep, you know, excuse me. Carol Matthey had been out shopping, pushing a child around in a pram. I mean, who's to say that the child wasn't already passed? That's just a dark thought, isn't it? Robert says, I'm sorry to have to go and find it hard to listen to these things. Yeah, this is a really sad case. It's a really intense case, but it's really it's really it's a really fascinating case to see, science versus law, just versus, human discernment, human intuition and everything, and should that come into account. There's been a lot of cherry picking of information, but I'm going to get to that. Sorry, I'm taking this very slow. This will take forever. This is actually why I didn't just make a video and then upload it. It would take too long. So there was, this thorough autopsy. They can't say that she wasn't suffocated, but it's circumstantial. There's no smoking guns, so to speak, right? And it's because that 3 children in one family found dead this way, it really should be considered a homicide, unless proven otherwise. Some people think that the presentation of that piece of information, that thought way, really swayed her jury, that it just played on repeat in their brains. Her husband, Craig Folbigg, played quite a role because they had had quite a tumultuous relationship, as had Carol Matthey and her husband. And some people think that she was just desperately trying to get his attention all the time, get him to stay, etc. Husband Craig was the one that turned in Kathleen's diaries, and the diaries are cherry-picked from. There's no doubt about it. There's this AI program that the diaries were put through in their entirety, which came up with the conclusion that, well, this was just, there's no premeditation in here. This is just a deeply concerned mother doubting her own abilities, etc., etc. Another psychologist tends to agree with that after reading it in full, but the diary really does, it can be taken, some of these entries can be taken to show a very dark soul and a very dark intent, because there's things in there that can be taken really only one way, but Kathleen will say, well, no, what I meant was fate or God. I didn't mean that, when I say she was helped along, I didn't mean by me. I meant by God or fate. She was helped along to death by fate. And there's things that say, just as well she died because I couldn't stand her, and that kind of thing. And Craig testifies that his wife just, she just couldn't handle the children, couldn't manage the children. And it wasn't like she was juggling a lot of children at once. She would lose her temper with them. He said she would let off these deep guttural growls. And I think she's someone whose emotional cup was always just here. And I think she just tipped to overflowing just so easily. I think that's part of her trauma, now whether that's tipped her into murder or just tipped her into rage and resentment and having these usual feelings which people instinctively know we're not supposed to talk about our children, not supposed to say, oh, these effing little nightmares, my life is so difficult at times with them. You're supposed to be so ever grateful that you've got children and that you and just be this earth mother or, this ideal father figure, and that's it. So, some of the things she'd say, a good-natured baby, saved from the fate of her siblings, she left with a bit of help. That was how it was termed in the diary. And, you know, that really, that was one of the things that really sealed in court her fate. You know, and she says she was alluding to God or a higher power, you know, and saying, you know, I just wasn't allowed to keep this one. So all of the experts on, you know, the experts on each side, they all have really great arguments, okay? So, you know, there's experts that say the myocarditis, it wasn't that advanced. It doesn't necessarily mean that it would cause death. And there is nothing saying that, oh, she died of a heart attack or she died of an epileptic seizure, okay? And she was found to be undetermined. It was an undetermined death. So the fact that just through recent years that these scientists have found that the two girls, Laura and Sarah, have this type of epilepsy disorder gene. The two boys were found to have this gene called CALM2. It alludes to this is riveting, isn't it? Carmodulin. It's a mutation on a gene. The two boys had that mutation. That came directly from Kathy. Craig refused to be DNA tested for it. You know, I think individuals are going to be really hard pressed to decide objectively what they think about it. Okay, so the two little boys, one ruled as passing from SIDS, then Patrick passing of, you know, some sort of airway obstruction, maybe caused by the disease in the brain, and that might tie into the epilepsy. You know, you've got to decide, okay, so these things exist. Does it mean they definitely died of it? How do you be objective? I think it's very difficult to say. Sorry. Yeah, there's even, okay, so there's so many different types of experts. There's people from the School of Law in British Columbia who, you know, had been interested in Lindy Chamberlain's case and somehow correlate it to Kathleen's, I think, just meaning injustice for mothers, mothers who are already suffering and then are persecuted legally. And then there's this professor, Ray Hill, who says, okay, so 4 deaths are rare. Wouldn't 4 homicides be rare? But I don't know. I think if you can commit 1 murder, you can commit more. So, I don't know. So the AI program that was run by the FBI sort of thought that there was nothing premeditated in the diaries. And this doctor of clinical psychology, she just thought that maybe Kathleen was suffering through failing to meet her own standards, or rather her own expectations of mothering. You know, and Kathleen's supporters will say, you know, it's shocking. The diaries are shocking, but when you read them through and everything, you know, it just seems that Kathleen was letting her kids down. She felt really strong feelings of guilt, that they're not admissions of guilt. Sorry, I'm just trying to work out what out of my notes that I want to just mention. Yeah, so the AI said it shows her to be highly anxious, self-reflective, and honest. I mean, this is a computer program, I guess, but it's an artificial intelligence program. How do we feel about that? So Professor Penny Baker, who maybe developed that program and who ran the diary through every single word in it, yeah, that's what the AI came up with. She was not planning to kill. She just didn't beat the system. Most of the diary shows just ordinary day-to-day life, normal parenthood experiences. But I don't know. I think she obfuscates and could clearly be seen as lying about some of these entries. They're really dark, but maybe, any diary entry written by a mother who keeps losing children would be really dark and would sound really incriminating, because there would surely be such an element of feelings of guilt. So it was not another jury, of course. It's not a jury. It's not a panel of people that have pardoned her. It's this guy, Chief Justice, or is he a former Chief Justice now, of New South Wales, Thomas Bathurst. He found there was reasonable doubt as to the guilt for each of the offences, and so he pardoned Kathy Folbigg. So she's gone to live with a childhood friend, Chasey Chapman, who was friends with her throughout primary school, and said that Kathy was always sort of really wanting to be part of Tracy's family, just loved the hustle and bustle and that feeling of normalcy, and the arguments and the type of sort of ribbing and heckling and things within a family that was essentially sort of, dynamically healthy and loving. And she felt really bad. She'd lost touch with Kathy because, she's just having her own life, getting married, having children, going through health problems, and was actually in hospital when Kathy was convicted of murder. And when she was convicted, that's when she got back in touch with Kathy, and she's kind of driven this whole appeals engine. And yeah, I mean, do you think that this is a win for science but a loss for justice? This science, I think the calm 2 gene, okay, now that does exist. This is shown to, it's quite rare, but when it manifests, what often happens is it activates as a heart attack when a young child is overexerted. Not in the majority of cases are they in their sleep, at rest in their sleep, okay? And the gene that was found when this entire human, the entire genome was, whatever you call it, run or whatever, sequenced, is that what you call it? That has been found to cause death in mice, okay? So in mice, and that was relating to the two relating to the 2 boys. Now poor Patrick, he was revived. He had to live 4 little short months more with a type of brain damage, and I guess he was in a weakened state and an epileptic fit, especially maybe in his cot where he's not necessarily, he's not being watched for every minute. That could occur. I guess, little Caleb, apparently in hospital. Now that was so far back that they had to get his neonatal records. So maybe just like, some sort of piece of card with some information on it and a little blood spot on it or something. They managed to get the DNA off that and sequence it for Caleb. Apparently in hospital, yeah, he had difficulty with his airways because he couldn't breathe and do something at the same time, suckle or something, I'm not sure. But it wasn't determined that he died of some sort of seizure or anything. They didn't know a cause of death. They couldn't say it was down to disease or anything in particular. And it was called SIDS. And the girls, one of them managing to get, a reasonable little into toddlerhood and running around, very active, it didn't pass away like the majority of the very small minority of the people on earth that have this, 74 cases at the time or something, of people diagnosed with it, not all of them dying. And the ones that did die, 80% of those dying just moving around, being in a state of exertion, right? So having a gene for, a heart issue, well, that could be compounded with the myocarditis for Laura. But, Sarah was a bit older again, 10 months. And that was determined SIDS. They didn't see anything to show a particular type of death, right? Sorry, I missed a whole lot of these. It was just jammed and sitting on one thing. David Bryson, hello. Had to go and check on Nala. That's her little fluff boom, her little boom boom, her little doggy woggy. So she was pardoned, I think, a couple of weeks ago, Esbrook. Yeah, there's it's causing a furor. It's so divisive. Kez C, hi, Aussie here. This case was huge here. Maybe, just maybe, her first was SIDS, maybe the second, but after that, had she gone a little crazy and killed the other 2 or 3 kids? And Mark says, please thumbs up and subscribe. Thank you, because I never say that. I wonder what would have happened to this little discussion channel if I had ever said that. Probably nothing, but anyway. So her husband, Craig, after the pardon, he says he is still in absolutely no doubt. And it's really important to realize the science did not acquit her. The science just brought in reasonable doubt. And the law says must be beyond reasonable doubt. Mark would have to have an expert opinion on this one. Yeah, well, there's been scores of experts and there's some at real loggerheads. Hey, Johnny, how you doing? Yeah, there hasn't been anything that's been criticised as such about the original trial, except this Emma woman, from British Columbia, who is attached to the case because of her interest with Lindy Chamberlain, and then so was following Australian cases maybe. And, she just can't get over the fact that the jury was told, after 3, 3 or more, and you've got to consider homicide. The odds are just not right. So I really urge you to look up Carol Matthey and just see her being interviewed, and because she's had 4 children die as well over the course of about 5 years. Mark remembers when we had 100 subscribers here. Kez is kind of in the middle. Yes, it's so confusing, right? This is like why I put in there, what's the objective truth? You can believe one expert who will just say it's rubbish. It doesn't matter about these genes, that the odds are just not right, that the deaths still don't fit how these children passed. He mentions that Kathy is asymptomatic, so it's very weird. Why would we assume that her children wouldn't be asymptomatic? Why do we assume that having this gene predetermined, it's nearly like fate, isn't it? It's nearly like you're saying, well, that was fate then. They were, from the moment that they were born, just going to die of that disease. When people have the gene for, that there's some genes that are even considered linked to schizophrenia and all sorts of mental illness, let alone, say, maybe diabetes, a type of diabetes, or whatever disease it is, right? It doesn't mean that you're going to have exactly the same trajectory in life or in your death as other people in your family carrying that gene, because that's not the statistic, is it? And there's other factors. So it is interesting to note that a lot of the science, we are looking at things like genes, not sort of, a psychologist giving a learned opinion about what they know about human nature. So we're not sure if we're not quite dealing with the Dorothy Lewis here, perhaps, but I don't know. I still don't think that, we're dealing in data, we're dealing with numbers. That's not a full explanation. It's just, you have to be in complete agreement with the court that this is, all it's done is introduce reasonable doubt, right? And reasonable doubt, it just means that there's just not enough hard evidence to convict. Sorry. Yeah, people saying, the science is sound. It's confusing, but it's sound. But it's really atypical. She's really an outlier, and I just feel it's really weird because, what did I write here? I can't even read my own writing. When the girls died, why couldn't what killed them then be seen? The damage was from a heart attack. Why is it only a gene that is overriding the findings of what was physically seen at the time to have been happening? When these autopsies were done, and quite thorough ones, and it wasn't seen, Anyway, so So basically, there was an investigation from 1999 to 2001, just to give you an idea of like the vastness of this. Her trial was 2003. I think it went on for nearly a couple of months. So, you know, this was a trial as long as, say, a Laurie Vallow trial or whatever. And Kes says she's pretty sure that they did a lie detector on her a few times. Yeah, I don't know, but she's always very, you know, she's always very adamant. No, I did not kill my children, you know. And they tried to break her down. And I mean, if anyone was going to give a false confession, she was certainly under the type of duress that brings it. Well, what are the odds? I mean, 1 in a what? Well, that's the thing. I mean, this is a very rare genetic mutation, the CALM2. This is just in the boys. The gene that's been found in the girls to do with epilepsy, or is it the other way around? Sorry. The genes found in the boys to do with epilepsy, there's not this sort of human study that says, oh, wow, this gene, when it's in humans, it's life-threatening. It was found that mice with this gene will maybe pass away. Kes says, my 6-week-old nephew died of a genetic disorder. My brother went on to have 4 more children. The other kids are all carriers, but do not have the disorder. Yeah, so I guess it's sort of recessive gene. Yeah, I mean, you know, who knows how this gene works, particularly for the epilepsy, whether it's sort of active or not, right? Because scientists, as we know, they are trying to make a name for themselves. They all write papers. You know, the immunologist from this Sydney organization, Corella, she then went on to get a very prestigious posting in the UK. Yeah, yeah, I know. Mark Klein says, if Kathy isn't guilty, damn, she is going through hell. The hell that, you know, to the extent that most of us will never know. So 2003, the trial went on for a long time. She was sentenced to 25 years. So, you know, basically she served 20 years of this sentence. At the time, in 2003, and we can't apply knowledge retrospectively, in 2003, it was unknown at the time, but there were 8 other families that were overseas that had 3 children all die of SIDS. So it does happen, I guess. Yeah, Carola Vinwasler was the immunologist in Sydney that sequenced the entire genome for Kathy and her children. That's right. So what Caleb had, so Caleb was the first baby and he died at 19 days. In hospital, he was seen to have what they term a floppy larynx. Yeah, so, you know, a little baby, floppy larynx, with this epilepsy gene, which we don't really know enough about in humans. Yeah. It's really divisive. It's really going to be a conversation in Australia and probably worldwide for a long time. So that's Kathleen Folbigg there. I've been wanting to talk about this since June the 7th. I pulled this out of the Courier Mail. It just grabbed my attention. And I wanted to talk about it and how people just, they have their own opinions and they're talking as if things are hard and fast, because that's what's happening in Delphi. People have got their opinions and they've got this bit of information and they are just convinced they've got 100% the truth. Will we ever know the truth, right? And there's quotes, of course, from her legal team. Today is a victory for science and especially truth. Well, Kathleen said this. And for the last 20 years, I've been in prison. I have forever and will always think of my children, grieve for my children, and miss them and love them terribly. My eternal gratitude goes to my friends and family, especially Tracy Chapman and all of her family, and I would not have survived this whole ordeal without them. Yeah. It's very confusing because some of us that have just seen, I guess we can't judge, right? We can't say, okay, she's had the background of this traumatizing life with knowledge of what happened to her mother, where she came from. Has she questioned herself? She was this really adored little girl until the biological child came along. It was probably really confusing and she didn't know why she was now treated differently. And to be 16 and to find out that you're not actually adopted, you're still a ward of the state. If she was adopted, if that family had decided to adopt her, did they decide not to adopt her after they had their own biological child? Mark was adopted, and yeah, you did turn out okay, Mark, and you're not the exception. I'm yet to talk private, have an in-depth conversation with someone that's adopted and talk about their adoption, and I'm yet to see someone and realize that they are not fucked up by it. But I've also, read of accounts where people say, they are eternally grateful even for the foster system, because what that did was put them somewhere where they were away from, domestic violence and uncertainty. It got them into the school system. It ensured that they had an education so that they can grow and develop vocationally and just as a regular human being and go out into the world to support themselves and make a life. So, yeah, the individuality is so, it's really, I think, profound and elusive and evasive. What it is, some people might say it's your soul and what you're bringing in to your new life that makes you able to cope or not cope with whatever happens. Some people are resilient naturally and some people just have zilch. Yeah, I'm not a very resilient person. Yeah, and some people just are naturally really strong and yeah. People like Pat Brown Profiler are probably going to say, phooey, this is absolutely meaningless. It's just, so what? Especially about the mice, I can imagine. But, it's just the totality of everything. The bad luck upon bad luck upon bad luck. And I guess, the nature of the universe is that eventually all things will happen, right? So we have to accept that there are going to be outliers and there are going to be incredible cases or incredible instances of terrible circumstance that just don't amount to guilt, but just bad luck sort of thing. But it's like, Mark Klein, it's like we're in Esbrook, if you're still managing to be here, sticking it out, because this isn't very good as always, but anyway, it is like with Morphew, okay? So, there's going to be people that'll believe this set of circumstances is just fucking rotten luck, and it's genes, and finally the science was able to clear her, because we know that it looks bad, but she didn't do it, even though circumstantially she was the one. She's the common denominator. These children, they weren't with a babysitter. I mean, she was probably very traumatized. One friend I saw interviewed, can't remember on what, was it would probably be a lot more than that. And I know people cares that have spent a lot more than 10K and gone through so many hoops, and then even, tried going to China, and they've done so many parenting classes and all sorts of courses and things for years and years and years, only then to be turned around and told, right, well, actually, now that you're 45, tough tits. And so Kes says because of genetic history of her family, she would prefer to adopt, so there's no chance she'll have a bub with the same condition. You don't know what you're going to get with someone that's being adopted. You'd have to sequence their whole genome, wouldn't you? Because, you could definitely get someone with even more trouble. Wouldn't you rather... I mean, not to say that you can't love an adopted child, and Pat Brown, profiler, has adopted children, but yeah. Klein has many things in common to the Morphew case. What do you mean? In what sense? You say it's sus, very sus. You think the situation of blaming Barry, or what Barry did leading up and around Suzanne going missing? Do you think that he's sus? Mark, who said he was adopted before, he said he's never had a feeling to find his biological family. His adopted parents, he counts them as real parents, and never felt any different from his cousins. Yeah, I think that's really pretty cool. And Kez says she's, got a few more dodgy genes than the genes her brother got. So, that's got to be a worry when you're going to have children and that you've got a condition. It's funny because some people just, they know they've got a condition, they know they've got a good chance of their child having it, and they think, well, I don't want to consider myself disabled or whatever, and I think I'm just going to take a chance and we'll just deal with it. And they do, and they have children and they have the condition, or they don't. They might have a few children and they all have the condition. Yeah. Human beings are just, our diversity, what makes us decide something over another, why we choose certain things is really interesting. How we can how there can be one thing that we can just see totally different sides of, right? But what do you mean about Morphew, Mark? Yeah. So, Barry Morphew is suing Chaffey County. I had to think for a minute. Chaffey County for $15 million for for what it says, putting him through hell and everything. Remember, his case was dismissed without prejudice. So if Suzanne's body, for example, is found, or some evidence against Barry Morphew is found, there is no evidence against Barry Morphew. There is circumstantial evidence, I guess. They tried to take him to court with the circumstantial evidence, but if you've ever read that ridiculous, Mark says Barry Morphew is guilty as hell in his opinion. So it's a very strange affidavit, and it's including things that just are meaningless. And they think it all added up to getting a conviction in court. That was very unusual affidavit. Normally they'll be, maybe 2, 3, 4 pages long. And then when you do get the discovery, it becomes quite apparent, usually, why why the person was arrested and charged in the first place, right? And it's not usually all in the PCA. But, in Morphew's affidavit, it's like that just every single thing was in there. There was nothing left. This was it. They just thrown this all in. And nothing was definitive enough. So, Mark, I think you're saying his workers know. Do you just mean Morgan and Jeff, or I want to say Cassidy. Why do I want to say Cassidy? Corey. Who? Can you type it in there, Mark? The young fella are you talking about? Were they called as witnesses in court? I mean, it never went to, the preliminary. It was the... Oh, God, why can't I remember? This is actually appalling considering. You believe his daughters deep down know also. Yeah, they may well... Look, let's just say, Barry Morphew did kill Suzanne. Sure, his daughters, Mallory and Macy, they may very well have their doubts or concerns, or maybe even, truly think that he did do it. But they are in such a tough place. Why do you think his work crew know? Because, number one of them's a felon and a liar and a douchebag. Another one is proven to be a liar about a couple of things, times and that sort of thing. But hey, they might have a good idea because they know when they got to the Broomfield Wall that he hadn't done anything. But this is where the circumstantial evidence, where people can be victims of unfortunate things, right? Things seeming to be a certain way, just as the devil's avocado, so to speak. Barry Morphew could have been punishing Suzanne for, for being mean to him, not wanting to be his wife, and, for no longer being satisfied with his, jock status quo, and he could have wanted her to be alone on Mother's Day. Now, people will say he wanted her alone on Mother's Day because he didn't want anyone around. He sent people away. Do you send your daughters away when they're that age? I guess you could. Why did they decide to go when they did on a little holiday? I don't know. Was it because it was just before the start of another term of school or something like that? Sometimes things can conspire to make one look really guilty. Look, I can't say I can look at objectively the truth for Lloyd Rainey as well, right? But that's the case from Perth that I spoke about. There was some just awful contributing, not just factors, but, circumstantial things like, just things happening in their life and things that Lloyd was hiding that you could use as, reasons for someone to want to kill their wife. It doesn't mean they did it just because those factors are there, just because a marriage is bad, just because someone's lost money, just because a wife wants to leave, just because there's children involved where, now Lloyd Rainey's children, I think they were just sort of little slightly under the ages of Mallory and Macy when their mother died. She was found buried up in a park called Kings Park. Mark Klein says, showing up to a job with no tools or plans, he was cheap and business guys don't do that. Yeah, but he's a crappy business guy. He did do that. He did it all the time. Like he's a useless businessman. He's a grifter, hustler. We know that. So that's just playing true to type. That's just acting like he has in every other fucking job that he did, right? The bleach smell, Mark, that's bullshit, you see. That's bullshit. Also, convicts don't lie 24/7. Some are just somewhat honest at times. Well, he's a prideful man. He's never going to say, yeah, the marriage was struggling, it was failing. And especially now, they wouldn't want to. And of course, the girls are going to backpedal. They don't want to be saying, yeah, there were fights and everything. I mean, it's highly likely that they're manipulated and gaslit, of course, right? They've been in dad's company. They're probably very confused. Children don't want to lose both parents, okay? And sometimes, young people whose brains aren't formed properly until they're 25, and Mallory was 16, they still support a parent. There is a case in Australia where the girl's just standing by her dad. He was found to have brutally murdered her mother and gone and buried her in the bush, and she just doesn't want to lose both parents. She just can't face that, even though she has to face that her father killed her mother. She has to face, the way she's sort of coping with it is to remember that it wasn't always like that there was a true relationship there at times, that they were both her parents, and that at times they were very happy. And this awful event has destroyed that, but she can't bear to be on her own. And she's a young girl. I think she was sort of Mallory's age, or maybe, maybe 17, 18, 19. She's sort of 21, 22 now, when she's sort of talking and trying to explain it. And yeah, he's a crack businessman. He's a rip-off artist. So, why is it a surprise that he did this to Broomfield as well? That's actually staying in pattern. That's not breaking pattern at all, right? So, it might actually be true that was all a really weird ruse. But at the same time, it's also completely within his pattern and his scope of behavior, right? There's nothing abnormal about that. Yeah, there's nothing abnormal about that. So, I see what everyone sees. But, I think as far as someone getting a conviction for it, they weren't going to get that with everything that they had at the time. I don't know what else they might have now, but he certainly should never have been charged. I think that Linda Stanley was being egged on by people like Chris McDonough, who was like, oh, silly. Why would you think that I've got any influence or would be trying to do that? But, I think that Linda was talking to Chris, telling people what she was going to do, certain people. That's why he flew into Salida. He's trying to say it was just his instinct, but of course it wasn't his instinct. He had, an inside leak from Linda Stanley, I believe, but probably because he was saying, he's getting ready to run. Barry's going to run. So what? Do you think he was going to leave America? Nah, probably not. If he was going to go anywhere, maybe he was going to go back to Indiana. There's nothing to say that, they couldn't go to Indiana and arrest him. Yeah, Mark says, I don't want to be a know-all or anything, but if that was my sister or friend, this is where you've got to, think about, if you were family, right? Well, okay, there was the fiasco of the search that September, okay? What else, though? What else, Mark? Maybe do a little interview, Melinda do a little interview with someone and, boo-hoo. Her family have not done very much to pursue anything. And I think someone, maybe a nephew or something, might have recently got in contact with AK Rocks or just said something about an initiative that AK Rocks is doing. And it's like, okay, 3 years later. Is it 3 years? Yeah. Is it 3 years or 2 years, Mark? Oh, gosh. I know there's been 2 birthdays, hasn't it? 2 birthdays that she's missed. So Mark says, public detectives, grand juries, prosecutor, cops, most of the time get it correct, honestly. Yeah, I mean, we have to try to have faith, don't we? Even though I think sometimes in true crime, because you were seeing sometimes the worst of the worst, it's easy to forget that there are really good, competent authorities around. People operate better in some areas than others. The fish rots from the head, and sometimes in law enforcement it's just a basket of rotten eggs being laid by a really rotten chicken. And people, we see investigations that we want to pick the hell out of all the time, right? Like Nicola Bulley. People will not believe that Nicola Bulley was in the river in Lancashire, in the River Wyre, all that time, because people couldn't find her for 2 weeks. And, they won't believe that Kylie Rodney was in the water over in, near Lake Tahoe, and that sort of case, are the ones that, really get people riled up and upset and in a negative frame of mind. They get it wrong plenty of times. They're under pressure for results. They have, they make the mistake of having that one-track mind and not remaining open. I mean, how foolish, isn't it? How foolish of Barry to pursue this case because it's going to bring, much more wild scrutiny, isn't it, than he's had for a year or two. And he could just seem very, very guilty, but he is just, as, as possible, or he is just the most narcissistic, arrogant man. Yeah, the girls, the girls, Mallory and Macy, you were saying before, you think they might think their dad is guilty. And of course, they come across as people who could easily be seen to be under a spell or under threat or under orders. Come and hold daddy's hand and come and stand up for daddy if you know what's good for you. And so people think, well, they're pretty grubby themselves because, they're choosing to try and have a life that's going to be fed with this law legal case monies rather than stick up for their mum. Yeah. And I don't know. Yeah, you feel like if your mother's missing, wouldn't you just be trying hard to solve that mystery, especially when you do have the power of having such a high profile. Mark says, in true crime, some think it 50-50, guilty, innocent, but that's not true. I think you mean that, law enforcement officers are usually on the ball most of the time. And Kez says, at first, a body sinks 3+ days. Later, the body starts floating and floats for a couple of days before sinking again. Yeah, and Kez, there are so many instances in that river, but also in the river over the bigger river, Derwent, where exactly the same thing has happened. And, with that weir, I even filmed the little weir near me, or this little bit where it was just holding something under the water just indefinitely, just with that little force of the water falling over and dropping down. And the searcher who was saying, he really just searched one side of the weir. He was saying, well, look, the police have done this other side. I'm going to thoroughly do this side. But there's other expert, maybe he's just someone that was shooting his mouth off about his expertise that should have been a little bit more reserved, right? Because maybe he's just made a fool of himself. And, there's other experts, I can't remember their names at the moment, sorry, but who said, yeah, the way where her body was found, sonar equipment isn't picking up something where she was, and she could have been there on the surface. And to the conspiracy theorists out there who say, yeah, she was returned after all those searches, she was put into the River Wire after all the searches, the medical examiner would have done a full autopsy on it. Her body was looked at. They would have studied the water, the bioorganisms and everything that were on and in Nicola Bulley's body, and they will know that she was in that water for a period of time, that it was that water. People think, oh, she was being hidden in a shed and then, or wherever, or in a vehicle and then dropped there. People can tell how a body has decayed and where it's been, and that's that. She was in that water. Now, can I say she suicided or was murdered? One or the other. I don't know. I think her husband was probably, failing at business and refusing to grow up and get a real job. He kept trying and trying to be working with these international markets and everything. I'd say their marriage was suffering because, he's got a job where he's trying to contact people overseas. So he's online from 11 o'clock at night working. So, sure, they might have their routine in the morning with the girls, but, maybe she was lonely and lost in her marriage. She's the one with the serious job. But, that was probably falling around her with the state of international economics because of COVID. And she could have had a series of failures with her job where she's unable to perform for her clients just because of the market. Who knows? She could have been just overwhelmed. I think that is bloody awful that personal things about Nicola were exposed, the way it was and everything. But, her husband could have been a total douche. I mean, he looks like they look like this beautiful couple. They look like the English Morphews, Mark, if you haven't seen anything to do with Nicola Bulley's case. But, he could have really been putting a lot of pressure on the family and on the marriage with the way that he was operating, closing his businesses all the time. And, he just had a modus operandi when it came to the way that he would run a business and get money and close businesses and that sort of thing, from what I can understand. Mark's saying about Suzanne's kids that they didn't want to lose their father also. And yeah, it's very likely. So I think no matter what the truth is, okay, it doesn't matter. The truth could be that, oh, hey, maybe they're even really nasty to the point of conspiring with Dad to get rid of their mother. They found out about the affair and they were incensed and they all felt betrayed and they thought life would be better off without her. I mean, I don't think that's how they felt. But, if that is a possibility, I think, it's prudent just to leave it alone because, if they are in such grief and they're just clinging on to their daddy and not wanting to lose another parent, and they are suffering with what must be running through their minds, and there's really no one that they can talk to, they must feel quite, they're just in a really bizarre universe. They've been taken out of one universe and into another. And I think you have to give the benefit of the doubt, because otherwise you're being a very cruel person who is really piling on pain really unnecessarily. It's not very compassionate. And I think I would rather err on the side that shows that maybe I'm a complete nut job and stupid and was duped. I'd rather be going, yeah, knew that was a possibility, didn't want to go there. Mark says, also the brats never said thank you to the public for looking for her. Yeah, I know. And I think, Mark, though, in all honesty, why? Because they, I think they found it very hard to separate those people, those genuine people, the good people, the kind people, the searchers and everything, from certain factions, YouTubers, people that have made the most cruel videos about them, people that were making all sorts of allegations and really, digging in. And Mark says thumbs up and please subscribe, and that he likes my thoughts. Well, thank you very much, Mark. You're very too generous. Anyway, I'll wrap up, but I think they should have found a way to express themselves. They could have made it clear how they felt about other shenanigans. I mean, they have absolutely been pretty much RAED, emotionally, mentally, brutally through online. They have been, they've been assaulted through people's actions, beliefs, movements, through, and if they're feeling that their father is being unfairly treated and everything, then all they feel from the public is hate, distrust. They feel, they'd be feeling like it's an attack, it's lies, it's a manhunt, it's predatory, it's terrorism, So, yeah, no, I don't. I feel it is really hard to explain away. It's hard to make excuses for. I can't excuse it because I feel that. But yeah, what guidance are they getting as well, right? I feel like they've just got no one in their life that they can trust, and that is a mentor and a proper life coach, if you will. I think, yeah, there's no one around them that is in a sort of stable human behavior frame of mind, maybe, that is advising them and everything. And I think they've had really negative experiences, and they fucking hate the internet, and they hate people, and they hate the world. I don't know. I could, maybe not, but yeah, I do feel as well. I mean, I don't get past that. When I make these video, like, I don't speak on this case now because I just received a whole sack of shit over it, and like you would not believe if I told you everything. And but it was because, I'm always playing the devil's avocado. It's not because I don't it's not because I disagree with everything like that, thinking, yeah, they are coming across as really spoiled. But guess what? The Mormons have hardly, what have they done? They're the same, but people aren't saying it about them. You're not allowed to. You're not allowed to say, Andy, what you think about people, right? And their actions and their motives. And talk about some pretty strange coincidences to do with money and everything from somewhere else as well, right? Because it's just, so you can't have an open debate. But yeah, I try not to take it personally, sort of thing, because I didn't do anything personally for the search for Suzanne. But there were hundreds of just such pure, well-meaning people. Some of them turned into stalkers, haters, and the such, okay? But yeah, they should have found a way to say a grateful, sincere thanks for people that invested their love, their time, their energy, their resources to go to Colorado to search for Suzanne, for people who have put up posters and, tried to spread the word. But there are some really, so I agree in the sense that, look, they should have made a statement, and they should have been very open, very bold, very transparent, very visible with their thanks. They could have been stopped. I don't know. I mean, the GoFundMe and everything, that's all very, I know that's divisive. And yeah, there's so many other things. I mean, people shouldn't, hopefully they haven't forgotten about Trevor Noel, and well, I know certain people wouldn't have. But I mean, there's been some pretty crazy things made up and said and put on the tubes and that sort of thing, right? So in a sense, they're not in a position where they are seeing a lot. That's positive, but they should, and maybe through their grief and the trauma, they haven't been able to compartmentalize, and it's all, magnetized together. It's all fused together, welded together, glued together. What, I don't know, yeah. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. I mean, I haven't really tried to follow what's been said by his lawyers, Iris Eaton and everything, because I just can't stomach all that sort of speak. Yeah, look, you know, I know people think he's guilty, and hey, you know, probability is that he did disappear Suzanne, but there's plenty of other things that could have happened until you see the evidence. And, you know, he could just be this just really unlikable guy who does really unlikable things, who is just caught up in something, events that just so happened to happen when his wife went missing, you know. But yeah, there's also several ways in which, you know, several manners in which he could have devised for her to disappear. That's for sure. And, you know, if I did decide to go down that route, there are a couple of theories that I have, one of which I don't think I've ever said on here. Yeah, I mean, you could just pick something and then work from there, you know. But that's what worries me sometimes about cases is people picking something and then they work from there. And then, you know, a lot of cherry picking happens. Even sometimes people are just really unconscious of what they're doing too. But, you know, there's a lot of intelligent people. There's a lot of people that, you know, have made a living from understanding human nature, and they think he's guilty. And there's other people that make their living the same way, that think that there's not any evidence for it and that he could well be innocent. And yeah, being unlikable doesn't make someone guilty, I get, you know. But yeah, I used to talk about how he might have done it and what points to his guilt and things like that. But because of that swell of, you know, the movement of Barry Morphew was guilty and this, that, and the other, and all the, you know, I don't want to single out Tube Crime or someone like that, but all those videos that they were making about Morgan being his baby daddy and her children being his. I mean, so many people have been affected by that movement against Barry Morphew, you know, and some of the ugly things that were done because they felt righteous about it, because they, you know, so believe in his guilt, that they didn't care who they spoke about, what they said. That's what made me just go, do you know what? I'm not even going to discuss it in that way now. Every time I see something that's clearly bullshit, I'm just going to speak up against it. And then, you know, so of course then things got really awful on here. Anyway, I think I will go. I don't even know what time it is, but I think I have to take Carnivore Dog somewhere. He had his surgery. His eye does not look right at all. and it's not the same. And it ends up that when they'd removed the carcinoma, when they had to sort of Clockwork Orange his eye open, they've put an ulcer. He's got an ulcer on the eye, and so it wasn't healing. So his eyeball was swollen. It was really weepy. I couldn't get near it, and it just looked, God, it just looks awful. And he was such a pretty boy. But, you know, so I had to continue on with some more anti-inflammatory medication and putting these drops in his eye. But, you know, I kept taking him to the vet saying, this doesn't look right. Look at it. And they'd go, no, I think it's all right. And then they said, you know, just stop with the eye drops. You're probably putting too many in. Barry Morphew will rot from the inside out. Yeah, probably. Yeah. Well, thanks for being here, Mark. Anyway, yeah. So with Carnivore Dog, and anyway, so it turns out they did another stain and they go, oh yeah, he's got an ulcer, and it's right where they've sort of had to jack open his eyelid, so that they've scratched his eyeball. So no wonder it was so sore and not healing. But anyway, yes, yeah. Are you going to play golf now, Mark? Does your wife play golf with you, or do you run away? Is she a golf widow? You know, it's like there's all these widows in the world, right? You know, you can be a jazz widow. you know, if you're married to a jazz musician, or you're a golf widow, if you're married to a golfer. That's something funny, right? You know, in Delphi murders, Kathy Allen she was fused at the hip too, Richard. I think they had quite a codependent relationship. She did everything. Tuesday, golf, no girlfriend yet. Oh, okay. Oh, I thought you were married, or you divorced or something, but you've not got a girlfriend. They're too expensive. Don't let money put you off getting a girlfriend, because then, you know, you just end up putting off things forever. I've just put off relationship just forever and ever, and then before you know it, it's a decade, and then you just don't, you know, it's just wasting so much time thinking, but I won't because of this, because of that, there's no point, then, you know, because of, and then all those coulda, woulda, maybe, wabies, you know, and yeah, and then you've been alone for another year, another 5 years, another decade, another, so don't put that off. You've retired now. Yeah, so that's good. You can play as much golf and as much softball as you want. Yeah, all right. So thank you, everybody. So I just wanted to bring up this case, Kathleen Folbigg, who many people think has Munchausen by proxy. 4 children died. She had 1 child at a time, and each of them died, each child living slightly longer than the other one. But because there were 4, that set off serious alarm bells. She was investigated, taken to trial, put in prison for 25 years, and now she's been pardoned because of science. But are we being manipulated about this science? Are we being told something that we don't understand? We're being told to believe that it means something that it doesn't. You know, because it's not like anybody in the world has ever lied to about science, and by sciences, you know, scientists, I used to believe in science, you know, I'd believe in science, put my faith in science, but you know now how much it is used against the lowest common denominators. And, you know, so what is happening here? You know, a lot of scientists, you know, they all do things because they're interested in it and they hope it'll lead somewhere, and they get to papers about it, you know. So scientists are people too. They have foibles and weaknesses, and I know no one's listening now, but you know, this is just for someone who might watch it later. I'm just doing a wrap up. And you know, have they proven their case? I mean, no. They've introduced some reasonable doubt information that didn't exist in 2003, and it does now in 2023. Had it existed then, how would the attitudes of the jury have been? Would they have said, well, actually, we're not as easily bamboozled as our future selves, as the future 2023 people who are more intellectually lazy and who walk around wearing masks and making themselves sick and not getting out in the sunshine when they need to, and who don't believe in the Wuhan lab, even though data shows it for 3 years. We'd known about the lab. You know, so maybe those people back then were slightly more discerning and would have said, well, hold on a minute. You need to explain that about the epileptic mice. Okay. So, you know, it's still possible that Kathy Folbigg is a murderer. She's a serial killer. Okay, so now I'm going to look at a lot more to do with this Carol Matthey lady. Maybe I just don't like her effect because I didn't like the effect of Cleo Smith's mother. I did make a very sincere apology video to her. But, you know, yeah, I don't like but must be the victim of all this circumstantial evidence, just like Barry Morphew might be. Terrible marriage, fights, all these things going on around the time of, and the terrible truth is women do this for attention, but it's, it's human beings trying to decide who's guilty and who's not. And, this lady was found guilty, this other lady not. And as far as we know, to date, this other lady doesn't have the excuses now of genetic coding and things like that, right? So, yeah, human nature, Johnny, is just, she could just be the luckiest woman alive. Walking around now, she can, hopefully she's humble. I mean, there's been some really crappy TV moments, let's just say, where she's shown, putting flowers in a vase and sitting outside drinking a cup of tea with an old dog. And it's all just painting this beautiful picture of this genteel woman who has truly, suffered in multiple ways, piled grief upon grief upon grief, right? But, 4 children. And I don't know, is the science telling us what we are being manipulated to believe? Because remember, scientists are people too with agendas. They're with agendas for getting grants because they're in these strange fields and, limited jobs maybe. And they need to create their own careers, their own livelihoods sometimes. I mean, there's a lot of institutes that do a lot of research and things like that. But, they need to interest the world in their prospects, to increase their prospects so that they can get exciting posts to the UK like Corolla did, after her work finding that, breaking down this genetic code. But, have we questioned it enough? And does that override the just truly bizarre level of, bad luck? What's the word, What are the odds sort of thing, right? That one couple have children that are born 2 different defects, so-called defects genetically, that have attributed to their death, when in all cases the mother never picked up the child, the mother never gave CPR to the child, the father in one instance did try to revive the child, that was Patrick, but I don't think he was there at the time when the alarm about him being in danger went off. The children with the heart conditions didn't die when they're up and moving around, trying to walk or running around, as in the case of the older child, as is more common for the people that do die that have that gene. We aren't given any odds on the person having the gene dying. Just because you've got this gene doesn't mean you're going to die. And we know that smothered babies and children can sometimes show no physical sign of that. People will say, well, Sarah was older and she would have struggled, even if she was attacked in her, being attacked in her sleep, and would have woken up and have struggled. And that's awesome. That's just someone manipulating you into going, oh yeah, she would have struggled, and there would have been bruising on her mouth, and she would have had bruising on her arms. And it's not true. It is not true. Rebecca Towns is having a birthday today. Happy birthday. It's not true. What if a child was tucked in, and while they were in their sleep, tucked in very tightly? and couldn't move and then was untucked. There's a myriad of ways, you know. And, you know, Kathleen was often losing her temper to the point that, you know, it was really disturbing to her husband. And her husband was desperately frightened of something happening to Sarah. And he also was desperately unhappy in his marriage. And wouldn't you think someone desperate could do a desperate act to hurt that desperately frightened spouse? Perhaps, you know. You're 60 today, Rebecca. Oh, you know, 60 is the new 40, as they say. I hope you're feeling 40 and not 60. I'm definitely feeling 52 these days. It's absolute agony. But, yeah. Aging. I won't ask how old Johnny is. I think Johnny's in his 50s. You sound older, Johnny. Sorry. Sometimes you sound older, yeah. I don't know. No, I think we're all about the same age, and Mark and everything. Yeah. Anyway, I've rambled on here long enough. Thank you, everybody who's come in to talk about this, because I wanted to just give that rundown of everything, because I think it's something that we are going to see a lot of, and we're going to start seeing, you know, because there are people who have lost a child, one child, who had this gene, and, you know, because the baby was seen to have been, you know, it was maybe thought to be really suspicious circumstances, you know, and CPS in America was going to take away another child, and this child was rescued by the grandparents who sort of turned up on the doorstep just in the nick of time. Oh, you're in your low 50s. You know, who are all just standing up for Kathy because they feel like they're relating. But, you know, they did not lose 4 children. And, yeah, it's a really tough call because, you know, if we are judging her to be a serial killer, we are really piling the grief onto someone that has suffered quite enough. But she really could be a psychopath, you know. I'm not sure what psychological assessments she would have had over the years and in the jail, and gosh, I'd be so interested to read it. I mean, because that is just unimaginable. Anyway, I keep dragging this on. It's 1:47. Yeah, it could go either way. How do you decide, right? How do you decide the objective truth? What is it? Because I don't know. I don't know that the science really helps her at all. I mean, yeah, I can see that it's taken her as far as reasonable doubt. She's been pardoned but not acquitted. And if she's thinking about bringing a case against the state of New South Wales, I think she's probably going to struggle. I don't know. Anywho, goodbye. Enjoy the rest of your nights or days. Rebecca, I hope you're going to do something that you enjoy for your birthday, even if it's nothing really much. And yeah, see you guys later. See you later.